Amethyst Bible Church, Renewal Christian Fellowship, Palm Avenue Baptist Church, North Point Christian Fellowship, New Hope Fellowship, Calvary Baptist Church, Lakeside Fellowship, New Life Christian Fellowship, and Emmanuel Baptist Church. Sandals Church has merged with 9 churches in the last 5 years. And I get asked all the time, what's the secret? How is that happening? How is that possible? How have you done that in a season where churches are dividing? What have you done to make that happen? When 70% of churches in America are in a state of plateau or decline, when it's more commonplace for churches to split, I mean, if we surveyed most of us, we would say that we've heard of a church split long before we've heard of a church merger. Isn't division in the church the norm? We see church leaders leaving ministry work in the droves for careers in the secular marketplace. We see 58% of young people today who were raised in the church leaving and not returning. And not only are these churches merging with us, but listen to me, they're thriving. God is doing amazing things as we come together with other churches. We're seeing churches that might have had 30 people in them now have over 1,000 people worshiping. We're seeing people baptized again. We're seeing God do amazing things. And I get asked over and over and over again, what's your secret? What's the secret sauce? What's the secret to these church mergers, to these church adoptions? How is it that God is doing such amazing things through this work? And I want you to know, friends, and I want you to know clearly that it has nothing to do with us at Sandals Church and everything to do with the people that remain. You see, the secret of why God chooses to bless these unions, to bless us coming together, has nothing to do with us and everything to do with the faithfulness of those who remain. In every single case, every person along the way has had to choose faithfulness over fear. It's so easy in the church world today to just leave the church when things get tough, when things are difficult, when church is hard, when your pastor retires or when he moves on somewhere else. It's so easy to leave the church and to walk away. But what's beautiful about what happens here is that there are faithful people who stay. And while there are many things that Sandals Church brings to the table, great vision and leadership and strategy and resources, things that are important in the church world, things that we need, things that are relevant to the process, right? We can't renovate a church without resources. We can't launch ministry work without new strategy and new vision and a new plan. We can't do this without stewarding those things well. But none of those things are possible without a foundation of faithfulness from the people who have stayed and who have stood through the most difficult seasons of ministry. You see, they have paved the way for the Holy Spirit to move in amazing ways. And our job and our responsibility is to simply come alongside and multiply their faithfulness. That's our part. We get to be a part of multiplying the faithfulness of those who stayed behind. You know, I think a lot about the people. I think about Pastor Pete, Pastor Chris, Pastor Albert. I'm reminded of just their amazing kingdom-mindedness. I'm reminded of how great their heart was and how great their desire was to reach another generation, of how open-handed they had to be to what God would want, not what they would want, but what God would want for their churches. I think about the amazing leaders, Jerry and Nancy and John and Jan, leaders who sacrificed greatly, who remained faithful during the hardest seasons of ministry. Listen, they clung to hope when all others left. They remained faithful. They remained selfless and dedicated. They personally sacrificed. They dug into their pockets deeply to fix roofs and to repair plumbing leaks and listen, to do whatever it took to make sure the church continued and the work of the ministry continued. They sacrificed greatly. I think about the 18 members of New Hope Fellowship, all in their 70s and their 80s and their 90s, many of whom were too frail and too weak to do the work that needed to be done, and the church building was falling apart around them. Their finances were dwindling. But listen to me, they remained faithful. I think about 94-year-old Mrs. Dean, the widow of a former pastor who stayed and who prayed faithfully every day for her church. And listen to me, she showed up to worship with 7 or 8 other people in a building that was falling apart around her. But she remained faithful. Can you imagine what it would be like to go to church in a building that might seat 200 or 300 people with only 6 or 7 other people? Can you imagine how hopeless that might feel? Yet they remained faithful. I think about the deacons and the elders and all of the remaining members of these churches who remained faithful during the hardest of seasons. They stayed and they served and they loved. And listen to me, their faithfulness mattered. It mattered. I think about the challenging seasons of ministry that all of these people at these churches would have faced. I think about the burdens that they would have had to bear. I imagine what it would have been like to watch their church fall apart around them. I imagine what it would have felt like to sit in a sanctuary with maybe 30 people or 40 people or even 8 people when the sanctuary could accommodate 300 or 400. I imagine what it would feel like to watch their finances dwindle. Maybe they got to the point where they couldn't even afford to pay a pastor anymore. Or maybe their pastor retired or passed away and they just didn't have enough money to go hire somebody else. Maybe they rested in this place where they just imagined that the good old days were behind them. They just thought that was it. The peak of our ministry is over. You know, I think in so many ways, these faithful members must have felt a lot like Joseph, right? Now, Joseph went through a lot, we know that. But certainly Joseph would have felt abandoned. He would have felt forgotten, maybe alone, separated from his family. He probably at times even felt awfully hopeless, I would imagine. But the Bible reminds us that throughout Joseph's story that God was with him. In fact, Genesis 39:2 begins with the Lord was with Joseph. And it goes on to say that God extended kindness to him. I can't imagine how hopeless Joseph would have felt at times over those 13 years. You see, it took 13 years before Joseph's dreams would become a reality. And we've got to remember that our hardship and our faithfulness are never lost on God. They're never wasted. God never forgets. You see, God had Joseph right where he wanted him. God had Joseph right where he needed to be. Now, you might be thinking, well, this is great, but what does this mean for me? I mean, it's great that these people were faithful. It's great that God's writing a new chapter of their story. It's great that they stayed behind and that they sacrificed. That's all great, but what does it mean for me? What am I supposed to do with that information? Well, look, I think it means a lot of things, but there's really a couple of things that I think we've got to hone in on. A couple of things that we just need to cling true, some truths that I think are foundational and undeniable. Some truths that we need to bury in our hearts and we need to cling to as long as we have breath in our lungs. We've got to honor the faithfulness of those who came before us. We've got to remember that their legacy matters. We've got to remember that they've made great and grand and significant sacrifices. We can't forget, guys, that the church is built upon generation after generation of faithful, selfless servants, and that our job is to be the bridge to the next generation. We're the torchbearers of faith. And listen to me, the other thing is that God blesses our faithfulness in ways we can never imagine. You know, as I reflect back and I think about all of the churches that we've connected with and all of the hundreds of people that have been involved over the many years of these church adoptions, not a single person, not one, not a single person has ever said, this is exactly what I thought would happen. Never that's the case. It's always something like, I never thought in a million years that this is what God was going to do. I never imagined, I never dreamed that God was going to answer my prayers in this way. I never thought this was how God was going to redeem our church. I never imagined that this is what God was going to do. You see, more often than not, our prayers are so little, and God's dreams for us are so much bigger. And so, friends, there's one thing that I want you to remember today. There's one truth I want you to cling to, and it's that God blesses the faithful. God blesses it when we're faithful, and it's our job, it's our responsibility to honor those who remain faithful. And we've got to remain faithful as we do so. God bless you, and thank you.